Hello, everyone. Uh, so happy you're here with us. Right now, we are having a pretty cool and lots of people in this panel discussion. It's the evolution of the MSL role. Where are we now and where are we going? Again, there's a lot of people. I'll briefly uh, mention it so we can have them with us. We have Giovanni, Tracy, Monica, Sherry, Stacey, and Claire from all around the globe, pretty much as well. So a pleasure to have you all, guys. Welcome, and please, Giovanni, take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Giovanni Passiatore. I'm leading the MSL team at Chiesi Global Rare Diseases, and I'm going to moderate the session today. Before we start, we should go around and introduce quickly all of us. I'm just going to call based on who I see on the screen. So I think, Tracy, you're the first that I can see on my right.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tracy Jason. I'm the head of medical affairs for Canada at Analyx, but I started my career as an MSL at Pfizer for about 3 years. Then I moved to be a MSL at Celgene for another 3 years before I took a medical advisor role. I then moved on to AbbVie, where I was a MSL manager for just under a year, and now I have my current role. So I'm really happy to be here and talk about the last decade of my life in medical affairs.
Thank you, Tracy. And next one, I will see Monica. You're on mute, Monica, sorry.
Sorry about that. My name is Monica Sukatme, and I just recently left Coherus. I was head of the MSL team at Coherus. I have held leadership positions in medical affairs at Janssen, Daiichi Sankyo, and some French biotechs, Innate Pharma, Nanobiotics, just to name a few. I have a little bit of commercial background too, I know, which is kind of a rare breed. And I especially love to lead medical affairs MSL teams. So I'm happy to be here today with all of you to talk about this topic.
Thank you, Monica. And I think the next will be behind you is Sherry. Sherry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sherry So. I'm the Senior Medical Science Liaison with Cara Therapeutics. Cara Therapeutics is a small pharmaceutical company based out of Stamford, Connecticut. I'm a pharmacist by background, and I cover dermatology and nephrology in the Mid-Atlantic states. I've worked in various departments throughout medical affairs for several years, working in big pharmas like Novo Nordisk, moving into Celgene for a couple of years before it was purchased, and now working in a very small company like Cara Therapeutics. So very happy to be here.
Thank you, Sherry. And Stacey, that is your turn now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stacey Rifkin. I'm the Vice President of Solutions at H1. H1 is delivering a platform that connects stakeholders across the healthcare ecosystem. So I'm coming to you from the stakeholder engagement side of the MSL story. And I've been with H1 for a year, but prior to that, spent my career as an MSL in pharma, started my career at Merck, went into headquarters and had a stakeholder engagement role at Boehringer Ingelheim, and then translated that over to the similar position at Allergan, where I've focused my career really on stakeholder engagement, KOL identification, profiling, and strategies. So look forward to talking to everybody today.
Thank you, Stacey. And last but not least, Claire.
Thanks, Giovanni, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I know there's, as Jonathan said, lots of people from around the world, so really looking forward to engaging with everyone. So my name's Claire, and I'm the Global MSL Excellence Deputy Director for Bayer. I come from a clinical background, so I'm a pharmacist like Sherry, and I began my career in Australia and then transitioned into industry within the UK within Bayer. I've held a number of positions within industry throughout Bayer, and currently, and that includes obviously being an MSL. Currently within my role, I'm TA agnostic, and I look after all of the MSLs globally for Bayer, and we're responsible for advancing and enhancing the overall strategy of the MSLs globally. So this topic of the evolution of the MSL role is certainly close to my heart, and I think it's a really interesting role. So thanks, Giovanni.
Perfect. Thank you, Claire. And we have a really great panel today with a lot of perspective from different parts of the globe. So, but I think that probably one thing we have in common is last 18 months, we have been only affected by COVID. And I think that's probably the topic of the last 2 years almost. So, and COVID has disrupted everything, including the MSL role. So let's start with our conversation based on what we been through in the last couple of months, last year. So what skills are now MSL need to have right now to meet the needs of the physicians? And I will start with you, Claire. So since you are the last one to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Giovanni. So I think this is a really great question. And I think that often, we need to think beyond COVID. I think we can certainly learn a lot from COVID, and it's really poignant to those people that are in the MSL teams at the moment to think about, what are those skills in order to continue to be the partner of choice for their HCPs. I know in an earlier session, I think it was with Howard, he really spoke a lot to kind of this topic of soft skills. And I think that when I think about soft skills, I actually heard recently Simon Sinek call them really human skills, which I really like, that this kind of term, human skills. But I think that what we saw with those MSL teams that really successful with engagement throughout COVID was that their ability to really pivot and continue to be the partner of choice with their MSLs. And I think that this is really down to them being able to differentiate themselves through these human skills or these soft skills. So I think as we go forward, the ability to be agile and be adaptable is a really key skill that our MSL teams will need to have. So whether that's really ensuring that you're able to be adaptable to the platform of choice or the way in which a different communication method that your HCP wants to engage with, or whether that's adapting to different new ways of working. We've had such a shift with the way in which our MSLs have worked within the last 2 years. That doesn't mean that change will stop, or that change is constant, and therefore that ability to adapt and be agile is really important. I think as well, what's really important is that we continue to have those bi-directional conversations, and we're able to, MSLs have really taken on facilitation roles at some stage. So again, how do you balance that scientific agenda while still having that human connection? And that's a soft skill in itself, being able to continue a relationship or build a relationship when you haven't met someone in person. I think there's so many soft skills, but I want to give the other panel members a chance to speak. So I'm going to kind of pause there for a second, Giovanni.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. And Monica, I come to you if you want to add anything or you agree on any on your thoughts about this topic. I think you're still mute. While you look into, I will probably, Tracy, I will ask you to then answer the question. So on.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Claire said. And I think it's also really important for people to maybe learn about how to look like an active listener online and on camera, because sometimes there's little subtle cues when you're face-to-face that you miss. So, I have been involved with, a little kind of training for MSLs on how to set up the lighting, how to, look engaged, and how to be more engaging online. For example, if there's a question period, shutting off your slides so people can have the camera, and just little tips and tricks. So whenever there's some good LinkedIn courses and all these things, just to, really show that you're still interested and engaged and you're not shopping online or doing something else when you're having a virtual meeting. So all these different cues you can give to make sure you're still looking really engaged, I think has been a big change during COVID that MSLs have maybe needed to adopt.
Thank you, Tracy. Cheryl, I also want to hear your opinion. I think that some of us who have been leading an MSL team and also probably don't have the same daily activity that probably you as an MSL had. I want to hear your opinion in the last 2 years, how your job have changed in terms of if you feel that some skills you have to adapt some of your skills that you had when you start in this role.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the really important aspects that COVID had put into perspective for a lot of MSLs is really understanding the physician's burnout. I think we all sort of, at least in the US, we sort of get and have sort of lived through physician burnout, but it's gotten to quite the extreme during COVID. So as MSLs in the field, it's really important for all of us to understand and relate to our KOLs and really try to understand the physician burnout in general. And I think what's most important that both Claire and Tracy had discussed is this bi-directional conversation. And from an MSL perspective, it's really important to think about if what I am bringing to the physician is bringing meaning to that physician's life as well as their patients. And so if we think more towards the perspective of bringing focus and betterment for the caring of the patient, then the KOL and physicians will be that much more interested in the information we're bringing them. And I think there's a different way to sort of do this, sort of kind of the soft skill perspective, especially if you're on the phone or communicating with the physician through email. Maybe just emailing them, how are you? How has your day been? I know it's been quite busy. And again, bringing that human perspective, like Claire and Tracy had mentioned, is really important. And it's definitely something we've learned more through the past 2 years, and we'll definitely be applying more in the future.
So I think Monica, we still have a problem to hear you. So I can think we can close with Stacey and here, and then we already having some question from the audience. So Stacey, you want to also provide your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, from my perspective, one of the things that I've seen has changed in COVID has been questions about where did patients go? And so one of the things that H1 is trying to answer, and my clients ask me a lot, is, there aren't necessarily patients that are going to the same academic medical centers that they were going to before. And so understanding maybe more about the community practice, right? Since patients are staying closer to home, I think those are important questions that the MSLs maybe didn't have to ask as much before, where they were in the academic medical centers every day. But now really understanding where those patients are, I think is an important question that we definitely have heard MSLs talk about. And so from a COVID perspective, I think that has changed the landscape a lot. And I think MSLs are adapting to that new environment with patients more diffusely distributed throughout the country.
Thank you, Stacey. And let's see if Monica's audio issues are being resolved. There's a question from the audience. So what are some tips you guys could give to MSLs in smaller companies to have an important impact nowadays on KOLs? Let's try with Monica again. And I think that you're still not working. So Tracy, I will go with you then. Okay.
Sure. So actually, probably my favorite time being in an MSL was at a small company and starting up. I think, and then the next question actually came in, and it was, do you think adaptability is the most important thing? And I think at small companies, an MSL really needs to be able to adapt and be able to answer more questions than maybe an MSL at a larger company when there's a lot of different functions in the bigger company. So for example, an MSL at a big company, you might have a lot of clinical trial partners internally that you're working with, and you might need to defer to them. But I found at smaller companies, you need to be able to answer really good detailed questions on the clinical trials, on pipeline, even be able to talk about, well, who is your patient advocate person, about reimbursement, all of these questions that you might be able to pass off to someone with a different function. So making sure that you're able to bring value to your HCPs by being aware of what's going on in these other departments at your company when it's smaller will bring real value to your HCPs.
I completely agree with your statement here. Actually, I think that in a smaller company, the MSL should probably be the one of the few point of contact with the KOLs, and sometimes having to wear different hats. Of course, not the commercial one, but need to also be liaise for the patient advocacy. That's very important in a smaller company, especially when we are looking, for instance, at rare diseases in which the patient advocacy groups are playing a huge role, including with the KOLs involvement. So I completely agree with your statement here. So let's stay with adaptability here. So another question, and I think I can go to Claire on that. It's so do you think that it's correct to say that adaptability is the most important skill an MSL should have? And I think that Tracy a little bit already gave a little bit her point of view on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I think it's an important skill. Whether it's the most important skill, I mean, that's debatable. I definitely think adaptability and agility are certainly up there, whether that's results agility, so driving results, whether you're in a small company or a large company, and people agility. So again, Tracy really nicely pointed out in terms of the people agility there in terms of being what I like to call like the partner of choice, being able to really answer the questions and the needs of your physicians. Again, I think this is really important in large pharmaceutical companies where there is a number of different stakeholders involved. So if there are different stakeholders involved, having to make that really a seamless integration or journey for your HCP is really important. So having that people agility. And also, that agility to pivot and that change mindset is super important. So I think certainly adaptability is key, but I would have to kind of debate that I think agility and again, some of those subsets of those agility is really up there for me in terms of what MSLs really need to possess in order to be not only successful in the role, but be really motivated within the MSL role.
Thank you. Cheryl, you also want to you have your any thoughts on this? What is adaptability? So how do you need to adapt? So as an MSL, that was important in your role?
Yeah, I think all the things that Tracy and Claire had mentioned are extremely important in being successful in the MSL role. Adaptability and agility has been important pre-COVID, during COVID, and definitely will be very important post-COVID. I would add, I guess, along with that is just the flexibility. I guess that's kind of in line with adaptability and agility and specifically, but I think also detail orientation is quite important in sort of the way along the sides of sort of adaptability and flexibility as well as agility, because all the little things, even when we're traveling or picking a certain location to meet where it's safe and you're following certain guidelines, especially in the United States, where every state sort of has a different guideline and every county might have a different rule against where you can meet, who you can meet, and even for how long you can sit there for. So making sure you're sort of doing your homework and finding out all of these details are quite important as well. And they will be after the post-COVID world.
Thank you, Cheryl. So, Stacey, I want to get back to you. You were mentioning about their potential also different KOLs right now, not just different MSLs. So, do you think that they are actually nowadays the KOLs are changed, and are we still prioritizing the ivory tower KOLs versus over the treaters KOLs? So, want to hear what your thought on that. I know you were discussing already a little bit earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that diversity in our stakeholder engagement is something that has really pushed forward over the past decade and really become something that we prioritize heavily. We all know that there are stakeholders who have thought leadership, but there are also other stakeholders that we really need to be thinking about in the ecosystem. And those aren't just the people who are in academic medical centers who have been practicing for decades, who have, it's always easy to find those people. But what we're really looking for are who are those other stakeholders that are important to us. And so some of those stakeholders include treatment leaders, right? So who are the people in the community that people are referring their patients to? Those are big questions that we want to answer. And MSLs want to understand who are those thought leaders in the community, whether they publish or not, whether they participate in clinical trials or speak on, podiums at congresses. They are people that colleagues are referring to. And so understanding what that local influence looks like, I think, is something that is really important in the MSL space. I also think we've been looking at a lot more in the payer space, right? Understanding what that universe looks like is something that's become more and more important in medical affairs. Key decision makers are another group that the MSL has started to focus on, looking at the account as a whole and understanding where in the account those decisions are getting made and who needs to understand the science behind our drugs. And then finally, of course, digital, right? So in that other landscape of social media, where there is a whole other set of influencers who may or may not be the people who are standing on podiums and doing clinical trials and publishing papers. Who are those people who are influencing? So I think what used to be really straightforward to the MSL and focused on those large academic centers that we can all kind of rattle off and name has changed a lot and really evolved to looking at the entire healthcare ecosystem and making sure that we're working with and understanding the needs of all of those stakeholders. So I definitely think that things have evolved, and identifying each of those groups is important for MSLs as they build out their territories and think about their engagement plans.
I think this is a very interesting topic. I work in in the rare disease right now, that's definitely the case in which treaters are most likely they are KOLs, and then not necessarily they overlap with a larger institution, but because they are really, it's where the patients are, that's where the KOLs are. So Claire, I want to get your opinion. You probably had also depends on which therapeutic area each of us is working. You may have a different way to take it. Is there anything that you think differently, or you kind of align with Stacey's point of view?
Yeah, no, I think we really need to look at in terms of different types of thought leaders or different types of KOLs. And certainly as we go more into, I mean, going back to what Tracy said before about Tracy in terms of looking at in terms of the patients. So again, who are the maybe the practical physicians at dealing with patients, or again allied healthcare professionals. Previously, MSLs, as kind of Tracy said before, were really looking at kind of high academics, speakers, etc. But I think that we again really need to be adaptable in terms of looking at who we want to engage with and what's important going forward, and really ensuring that patient voice is there, and that ensuring that regardless of who we're speaking with, whether that be a really kind of practical physician at kind of patient level or it's highly academic, that we make the data meaningful for them. So I totally agree with what Stacey said there as well. Yeah.
Tracy, you want to also listen to your opinion to see, also consider you also come from Canada. It's the Canada, landscape is the same, or that would be different,
Yeah, no, I have to agree with everyone that has already spoken, but I do want to highlight the allied health. I feel that nurses and study coordinators often end up knowing the patients better sometimes than the HCPs and KOLs, and especially if you're working on internal projects, to try to find real world evidence or databases. Oftentimes nurses and the pharmacists at the institutions are able to give you a lot more insight and a lot more of what's actually happening on the ground floor, so to speak, with patients and your medication and the therapeutic area and that kind of thing. So I really feel that in the last 5 years, nurses are on the top customer list, so to speak, for MSLs for sure.
Completely agree. And let's try to bring Monica back. Monica, I don't know if your issues are being resolved, but let's try. So we were discussing in the first question that what COVID has changed a lot of things in our life, but also the daily activity of MSL. So we noticed that, at least in my organization, and I don't know that this applies to you, that the internal focus has been, sometimes it's taking a little bit more, it's been more focused. The MSL activity are more focused sometimes on internal job rather than only field activity, as it used to be in the past. Would you agree with this statement, or do you have other? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yeah, finally. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Nice.
Sorry, I am so sorry. Thank you for your patience. So I think the answer to your question in short is yes, probably yes. I will say though that despite the loss in the field sort of peer-to-peer scientific exchange part of the MSL job, we do have a lot more creative opportunities, I think, that we probably didn't have or didn't really leverage before. For example, I've seen some fantastic opportunities to sort of fine tune our investigator initiated studies programs. I think that almost in all companies that I've worked at, an investigator initiated studies program is not perfect. The intake process is either not perfect. The process where the committee meets to determine budgeting and prioritization of the IIS is not perfect. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for MSLs to showcase how they intake, how they can really fine tune that process to make it better. That's sort of one thing I've seen evolve. Another is I think there's a great opportunity now more than ever before to collaborate compliantly with our sales and commercial teams, whether they're introductions or bringing in allied health. I love when I heard about bringing in pharmacists and nurse and clinical trial operations folks and everyone at the table where we can do it collaboratively in a collaboratively environment with commercial folks. And last but not least, I've seen a lot of great opportunities to work with our clinical operations teams internally. Even when there's an opportunity for a site initiation visit for clinical trials, having that MSL get out there with the clinical operations teams and maybe give a presentation at a site initiation visit, SIV presentation. I think these are 3 examples I can think of off the top of my head where some of the internal operations are actually sort of a great opportunity to replace some of the field operations at the grassroots level.
I completely agree, specifically on the topic of the clinical operation. I noticed that we are, at least with my organization, will be much more involved in the clinical operation part because there is also being a global company will have our time sometimes for time zone, and so the MSL be on the field, be virtually on the field, but be the same time zone can have easier and quicker outreach compared to the global function. So Sherry, I want to hear also your point of view on this topic.
Yeah, sure. I think clinical trials is an excellent internal sort of project for the MSL team. I think we all sort of understood too that during at least COVID, it's the clinical trial screening, recruitment has been very difficult, and just running a clinical trial in general between the year of 2020 till now has been quite difficult. And during that time, I thought it was quite pertinent to have that really essential relationship with the primary investigator and the study team, because the MSL is really at the forefront of communication with these individuals. And one, it really keeps the PI as well as the study team engaged, even though through burnout and all the work that they certainly have. They're also really essential in bringing back the insight from the trial site specifically, and this includes both positive and negative perspectives. What is working for them during this time? What is not? How can we help them specifically? And a lot of the recruitment strategies that we had utilized in maybe 2018 or 2019 might not work anymore. Things like physical pamphlets, as an example, right? If patients aren't coming into the office frequently, they're not going to be picking up those pamphlets. So using that as sort of the advertisement budget might not be pertinent as anymore. So even some of the little the little projects and things like that that are associated with the clinical trial, I think is quite important. And again, communicating important changes to the site, I think, is a vital role that the MSL plays. Of course, there are sort of mass emails that are sent out to all the clinical trials when there is some sort of change or a mandate to the protocol. But when you have a great relationship with the site and the study team, the MSL can actually pick up the phone or email the site. And of course, this doesn't change pre-COVID to now, but it's still quite important to utilize the MSL in that vital KOL relationship. And I will say too, there's other internal projects outside of clinical trials that the MSL role has really expanded upon. And I know for a lot of companies, it really depends on the structure as well as the workload. But for us, my company is very small. We're less than about 80 people. So the MSL team has really gotten involved with things like publications, including posters, abstracts, and journals. We also got very involved in medical information letters. We've gotten involved in even choosing the medical information call center and the different contractors we're using. So we're getting really involved and being at the forefront of some of these decisions we're making, especially with the tools that we're given.
Yeah, you read my mind. I was going to ask if any other projects has been the MSL have been involved. Also for my case, for instance, we involved the MSL in the medical and clinical insight generation and dissemination, not just adding on the CRM, but actually analyzing, working through the strategy. So really been an integral part of how we are building our own medical strategy. So I think we are in good time, like right now. So we can move to the next topic, and it's still, again, I think that's all, like everything that we are living. It's COVID focus this conversation. I think COVID again has forced us to be completely, fully stuck on our chairs for the last 18 months, and we probably this one of an example of many virtual ad boards, digital opinion leaders interaction. So I want to ask if, on your mind and in your opinion, that was a good shift, or was something that we wish to, I mean, we all wish never happened, but wish that we go back completely for what it was, like a face-to-face interaction. And I started with you, Stacey. You have also, from your point of view, probably would be interesting. And then I will move we'll move to Monica again, since she's been, she can provide more of her point of view.
Sure. Go ahead.
I'll jump in. So I think, Giovanni, I think that has two ways to look at it. The first is that, yes, it's definitely accelerated our focus on those digital opinion leaders and really understanding who they are and how they're communicating. And I think that that's something that we've all seen has really risen in influence and priority over the past 18 months in terms of just kind of shifting the paradigm. And since people are getting so much more information online versus face-to-face, making sure that we understand who those digital opinion leaders are and how to engage with them appropriately. And then I think from your other question, which is really looking at how we're engaging virtually with virtual ad boards and virtual engagements and all of those things, I think everybody will be excited to go back to the times of face-to-face, but we've opened up opportunities and accelerated those opportunities in ways that we couldn't before, right? So whereas people might have been resistant to working in this kind of platform, now we're really opening ourselves up to that opportunity. And that cat is never going to go back in the box, right? So we're always going to have this platform to be able to engage, which we didn't have before. And I think that opens up a whole new set of opportunities as MSLs to really make sure that we're engaging appropriately. And I think that that's about understanding our physicians, right? Understanding what their preferences are and how they want to be engaged. So to me, one of the first things I learned as an MSL was getting on the HCP's page before you expect them to get onto your page, right? And so that's really about understanding who they are, both publicly and how they want to interact with you, and understanding what those preferences look like. So as we stay virtual and move to doing more face-to-face, I think understanding those preferences will be more and more important.
Thank you, Monica. I will go for you with your, also from our within our role kind of a perceptive.
Yeah, sure. And I think just like Stacey, I have mixed feelings on this. I think there's two topics here, right? One is virtual one-on-one interactions with the HCP, and then the other are like everything else. And I think with the one-on-one interactions, I have mixed feelings on it. I think sometimes they're not as impactful. Maybe I'll even say many times they're not as impactful. Although I can think of a few instances where the sense of urgency to meet with the HCP was a priority. And in these cases, I think the virtual platform that we use now and that Stacey mentioned, the cat is out of the bag and is not going back in, right? I think they're not only welcome, but very, very many times necessary. When it comes to virtual ad boards, though, I also have mixed feelings. I think on one hand, the cost, relative cost, and manpower and woman power is less. And I think on the other hand, though, in situations where the participants in the advisory boards are maybe unfamiliar with each other, there can be more groupthink, and where one participant may go along with just what another participant is saying, just to go along with it. That's kind of one negative I've seen with these virtual advisory boards. There's also sometimes some more awkward silences, I think, on virtual advisory boards. So there's more of a need to sort of pull people in to the discussion. But I was recently really happy to see a creative response to the traditional advisory board, like where all the KOLs are gathered across the country and sat around this virtual table. I've actually seen some advisory boards that are focused on learning about how institutions are making decisions within a single institution. And this I've seen is really fantastic because you're bringing together HCPs that work together every day and are really comfortable with each other. And so these types of advisory boards have been really rich in insights and impact for the company.
Thank you, Monica. Claire, I also want to hear your thoughts. Are you also had mixed feelings? I know, for instance, I kind of agree with the mixed feeling. I also feel that one thing that I don't have a mixed feeling is, for instance, in the virtual conferences, I personally don't like it. I think it's one thing that probably I hope they get back as soon as possible to the one-on-one. But in general, come back to the general topic. What is your thought about?
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly there's a lot of kind of pros and cons in terms of digital events or digital ad boards and virtual interactions in general. But I think that, what really we need to think about, I don't think there's any right formula for this. I think it's certainly here to stay. But what's really important is that we really dig down and tailor and personalize things for the physician that we're engaging with. And ultimately, this is, I think, going to stay as in terms of the new frontier for engagement. I think complementary to face-to-face, and more kind of in this omni-channel way of communication. So again, we really need to understand what our physicians' preferences are. And I think that, again, there's certainly we need to really engage HCPs at their own convenience with their preferred methods of communication to make sure that we're getting better quality insights and engagement. I mean, there's no use bringing a bunch of traditional HCPs to a digital ad board. You're likely not going to get the best out of that. So that's why I think it's really important to really understand our physicians better. Many of our HCPs are digital natives, and so they grew up in this time of unambiguous technology. They were born, internet was already available. So I think prior to COVID, we were already shifting in this way. It's just that COVID has really accelerated that shift. Certainly there is cons to that, but again, I think what's really key to this whole working out what the right balance is really understanding our healthcare professionals.
Thank you, Claire. And there is a question from the audience that's kind of also can play a little bit like asking, like, how we deal with the digital burnout. So we probably experience digital burnout, but so the physician, and how we can keep engaged through all these different digital interactions. Tracy, I start with you, and then I will go to Sherry.
Sure. So, we did see this a lot, and I think we're still seeing it every day, even with ourselves. But actually, one of my MSLs was really successful at going back to an old phone call, right? Just picking up the phone and speaking to the physician. They can do it when they're driving home or in traffic. And you know what? It really worked well. And so many physicians would say, thank you for just picking up the phone and calling me, because I think that is something that people forget about. And the second thing that, we had some feedback with is, is there a way to get your message across using a podcast that, again, physicians could listen to in traffic when they're picking up their kids, making dinner, whatever it is? And podcasts rated really high when we had done some research to find out, did a bit of a survey trying to find out what method of communication KOLs wanted. And podcasts were rated really high. Some physicians just wanted a 5 to 7 minute podcast with an interview with a KOL in their therapeutic area that they respect, just like a Q&A. Some people were really open to 20, 30-minute long podcasts. So I think we can't forget about that. And then the other thing that I know we all do is we're always on social media. Our KOLs are as well. And there's lots of different asynchronous platforms or discussion boards that you can post and have questions up and invite different HCPs to, and have them have a dialogue back and forth, whatever time's convenient for them. We've really gotten some great key insights from that, understood where the debating hot topics are and that kind of thing. So although it's still using digital and screen fatigue, everybody's going to be on their phone at some point, and there's nothing more fun than getting into a scientific discussion on a website sometimes.
Definitely, that's a great example and great idea. So Sherry, the question is the same, but also want to add another question also for your experience that came from the audience. So, and I think Claire was a little bit mentioning that about the digital natives, but there is also a lot of KOLs, a physician, and also mid-levels who are older or they're not really technology savvy. So do you have there is any tactics around that in a way that you target your outreach basing on the digital burnout and also based on the technology savvy, knowing that KOLs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and these are great questions. I think Tracy really tackled a lot of the question itself. At least for the digital burnout, I think the great point that Tracy made was just being really creative. And because there are so many different types of content generation and interactions that can be done online, utilizing some of these really creative platforms might help get the HCP to engage a little bit better. I think the one that she did mention that was quite ingenious is sort of these asynchronous self-service type platforms where physicians can kind of go in and out as they please and interact or do any sort of program on their own, whether that is watching a YouTube video, listening to a podcast, doing a asynchronous ad board. I think all of these tools are quite ingenious, and it was sort of like finally moment when COVID hit. We were sort of like, yes, we can finally use this stuff. I also think digitalizing content for virtual use is quite important. We still sort of, as MSLs, utilize PowerPoint as our main tactic to communicate medical information and do a lot of education. I think kind of using more dynamic formats instead of sort of just the traditional PowerPoint also gets them really engaged. Even if it's something you can send to them and they can click on their own and watch on their own time, might get them a little bit engaged as well. I think from the perspective of navigating the KOLs that are not so internet savvy per se, like Tracy had mentioned, for those KOLs, I would just say just pick up the phone. And I would approach them sort of the way that we've always done it, where now things are sort of opening up and we can certainly meet them in person, whether it's outside, weather it's still kind of nice here, whether it's in their office or somewhere outdoors. Again, with something like that, you could be kind of creative as well. Maybe meet them for like a cup of coffee and a walk in the morning. I don't know. If you do have that close relationship with them, and again, it's kind of bringing in that creativity, both from a digital perspective and for the ones that don't really like it digitally, try to find a nice medium where it's safe and effective.
Thank you. And I think we have a couple of minutes left. So I think we can close with stay on these topics and a little bit quicker, like maybe so we can close. So we'll start with you, Stacey, and say, so we have a lot of data right now after 18 months. So at the end, we can say, what is your opinion? How this physician wants to communicate through what is really the channel? And also, do you prefer maybe a Twitter, maybe a more like an FDA kind of newsletter, a conference newsletter, something that's more like sterile in a way, or they prefer to have a contact, like more details?
Yeah, I think what we really have all discussed is meeting physicians where they are and understanding those preferences. A lot of times I've seen in my experience, physicians will say yes and engage to you when you ask them to, but you never necessarily ask them if that's the way they prefer to be engaged. And so I think what it really comes down to is being more focused on their needs and their preferences and understanding them from the get-go. It's always great when somebody says yes to you, but asking that same physician if this is really how they prefer to be engaged and asking them, what would be your preferred mode of engagement and how can we best make the use of this relationship, I think is really important. And COVID has given us the opportunity to pause and ask those questions, and I think we'll all be better off for it.
Perfect. Monica, I saw you're back, so I'll leave you probably the last word on today's.
Thank you all. I'm really sorry for these technical difficulties today. I think I really agree with Stacey that we often assume how KOLs want us to communicate with them, but we don't ask the question. And I think finding out what it is exactly and being able to bullet point it almost what they hope to get out of the relationship with us is really, really key. And sometimes that can actually surprise us.
Thank you. And I think we have another 2 minutes, so we can probably go around and Claire, I ask for also your opinion.
Sorry, I was just trying to get off mute. Yeah, absolutely. I think when we're talking, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. I think there was a bit of delay there. Yeah, I think, Stacey and Monica have really summed it up there in terms of, not assuming, we really need to ask. And when we think about this omni-channel engagement, I think we really need to unify communications across channels to deliver the seamless two-way engagement between our MSLs and our HCPs, instead of just looking at all of these different channels and let's bombard our physicians. It really needs to be this seamless integration, and we really need to then, depending on how our physicians are interacting with those channels, I think data and analytics are really important to back up what our physicians are telling us. So are they really, for example, if it's something that we've sent an email, or if it's something like an approved email, or invited them to a virtual event, etc. Are they attending? Are they clicking? Are they opening that? Are they interested in that? So it's continually assessing those engagement channels. And again, as I said, a seamless integration across each of those, so that's, again, including face-to-face.
Thank you, Claire. And I think our time is up, and I think we can talk in the background on the other 10 questions that we have here. So, but thank you, at least it was very enjoyable. I will thank all the panelists. Jonathan, I leave it to you.
Thank you all, Giovanni, Tracy, Sherry, Stacey, Claire, Monica. That was awesome. And I wanted to mention that below the screen, you guys can rate the session, and there's also a quick survey for each session. So if you love this panel, go ahead with 5 stars, or 10 or 20. I think 5's the most. But and there's a quick survey. What did you like? Parts of the sessions, etc. And all these feedback is great to have. Guys, I wanted to ask you for a favor. Can you please smile for a photo? Love it. Everyone checking their hair. No, awesome.
I take it personally, Jonathan. That joke.
I'm so sorry. I was just looking. Oh my God. Oops. Oh, no.
It's okay.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone. This was awesome. And we'll see you at the next session. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.